relentless New Mexico sun beat down on the arid hills, painting the landscape in harsh browns and bleached yellows. For Elena, a single mother whose world revolved around a small ancestral farm nestled in this unforgiving terrain, these hills were both her heritage and her daily battleground. Her life, a delicate balance of careful cultivation and sheer will, was anchored to the soil beneath her feet. She valued independence above all else, an independence hard-won and constantly threatened by the caprice of nature and the demands of survival. This season, however, a new, insidious enemy had emerged, one that burrowed silently, threatening to unravel everything she held dear. Mysterious holes appearing with unnerving frequency across her cultivated field. The sight alone sent a cold dread spiraling through her stomach, a fear of losing not just her meager crops, but the very ground that sustained her and her young family. Elena was a woman forged by the land, her hands calloused but gentle, her eyes holding the wisdom of generations who had coaxed life from this challenging environment. Her farm, a patchwork of stubborn green amidst an ocean of dust, was more than just a home. It was a living testament to her ancestors' resilience, a legacy she was determined to protect. Every sunrise found her tending to her crops, planting seeds with hope and harvesting with gratitude, each gesture a silent prayer for sustenance. The harsh beauty of New Mexico had etched itself into her soul, teaching her the profound value of every drop of water, every sprout of green. She understood the rhythms of the earth, the subtle shifts that heralded good times or bad. But these holes, these inexplicable voids in her precious soil, spoke a language she didn't understand, a language of disruption and unknown danger. The first few holes were dismissed as mere animal burrows, a nuisance quickly filled and forgotten. But they multiplied, appearing overnight like silent invaders, scattered erratically across the field, where her corn and beans struggled to thrive. They were too deep for gophers, too wide for prairie dogs, their edges clean, almost deliberate. A nagging unease began to settle in Elena's heart, growing into a heavy weight with each new discovery. She walked her fields daily, her brow furrowed in concentration, tracing the paths of these unwelcome disruptions. Each hole represented a patch of ground, lost, a crop endangered, a sliver of her family's future eroded. The farm was their sole provider, their only bulwark against the encroaching poverty that haunted so many in these remote lands. Losing it wasn't an option, it was an unthinkable abyss. The fear was primal, rooted deeply in the history of her people, who had fought for generations to hold onto their land against droughts, economic hardships, and the indifference of a world that often forgot the quiet struggles of those tied to the earth. She tried to fill them, shoveling loose soil back into the dark openings, but it felt like a futile gesture, an attempt to plug a leak in a dam with a single finger. The holes reappeared, sometimes in the same spot, sometimes a few feet away, mocking her efforts, signaling a deeper, more persistent problem lurking beneath the surface. It was a silent, creeping threat, one that whispered of inevitable ruin, of a life painstakingly built, slowly crumbling away. This wasn't just about strange holes anymore, it was about survival. Please subscribe to our channel to hear more compelling stories unfolding in unexpected places. The inexplicable holes, initially scattered like forgotten divots, began to multiply with alarming speed, spreading across Elena's cultivated field like an invasive rash. Each morning, new craters would appear, some no wider than a dinner plate, others yawning chasms that threatened to swallow whole sections of her precious crops. She spent tireless hours attempting to fill them, dragging rocks and soil, her hands aching, her spirit growing heavier with each futile effort. Yet by dawn, the earth seemed to mock her, the filled holes often reappearing, sometimes even larger, suggesting a deeper, more persistent problem than mere erosion or burrowing animals. A chilling dread settled in her heart. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was an existential threat, systematically dismantling her livelihood, piece by agonizing piece. The thought of losing her ancestral land, the very soil that had sustained generations of her family, was a torment she couldn't bear. Desperation gnawed at her, pushing her to consider options she had previously dismissed. She remembered stories of Sam, a local cowboy whose reputation preceded him across the arid New Mexico plains. He was known not just for his masterful horsemanship, but for an almost uncanny understanding of the land itself, its whispers, its hidden veins, its subtle shifts. More than that, he possessed a bond with his mustang, Apache, that bordered on the legendary, a connection so profound it was said Apache could sense truths hidden from human eyes. Sam was a quiet man, deliberate in his movements and spare with his words, but his presence in the small community was as solid and dependable as the mesa itself. He was a pillar, a man people turned to when all logical solutions had been exhausted. Swallowing her pride, Elena finally resolved to seek his help, knowing he was her last, best hope. A few days later, the distant silhouette of a rider and horse emerged against the fiery New Mexico sunset. Sam, tall and lean in the saddle, rode Apache with an effortless grace that spoke of countless hours spent in unison. The mustang, a magnificent creature with a coat the color of polished mahogany and a wild, intelligent gleam in his eyes, moved with a controlled power that was captivating. Elena watched them approach, a knot of anxiety and hope tightening in her chest. As they drew closer to the perimeter of her field, an immediate shift in Apache's demeanor was palpable. The mustang, usually calm and composed, began to prick his ears, his head tossing slightly. His nostrils flared, scenting the air with an intensity that suggested he perceived something beyond human comprehension. Sam, ever observant, immediately noticed the subtle changes in his horse. He dismounted, his gaze sweeping over the ravaged field, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his weathered hat. Apache, tethered loosely to Sam's hand, snorted softly, pawing at the dry earth near the first visible hole. He circled it, his powerful legs moving with a nervous energy, his head low, sniffing intently. It was clear even to Elena that Apache sensed something profoundly amiss, a disturbance far more significant than a mere gopher or badger. The mustang's unusual behavior was not just a curiosity, it was a foreboding signal, a silent warning that the mystery of Elena's crumbling field was about to deepen, perhaps beyond anything she had imagined. Apache's behavior intensified dramatically, the large mustang snorting and pawing restlessly at the parched earth near the most unnervingly deep holes. A low, guttural whinny escaped his throat, a sound imbued with an almost human understanding of distress, echoing across the quiet expanse of Elena's field. His powerful legs scraped against the dry soil, sending up small clouds of dust that shimmered in the harsh New Mexico sun. It wasn't just a nervous twitch, It was a focused, almost desperate communication, his dark eyes fixed on the crumbling edges of the largest depression. Sam, observing his loyal companion, felt a growing knot of concern tighten in his chest. He had known Apache for years, understood the nuances of every flick of an ear, every shift of weight, every subtle vocalization. This was not the usual curiosity a horse might display towards something new or unusual. This was a warning, a deep-seated instinct reacting to something fundamentally wrong beneath their feet. Sam watched as Apache nudged his large head into a particularly wide hole, sniffing deeply, then recoiling with a sharp whinny, his nostrils flaring wide as if detecting a scent no human could perceive. This wasn't a simple pest problem, nor was it a natural sinkhole forming. Apache's unwavering focus on this specific area, his agitation building with each passing moment, spoke of a more insidious, hidden threat. "He really doesn't like that one," Elena murmured, her voice laced with an apprehension that mirrored Sam's own. She had seen Apache's reactions before, knew the horse possessed a certain uncanny intuition, but never like this. It felt like Apache was seeing something they couldn't, pointing to a danger that remained frustratingly invisible. Sam nodded slowly, his gaze sweeping across the field, taking in the scattered holes as Apache continued his agitated dance around the central, deepest one. "No, he sure doesn't," Sam agreed, his voice thoughtful. He dismounted, tying Apache's reins loosely to a fence post, though he knew the mustang wouldn't stray far. There was a shift in his posture, a renewed resolve in his eyes. He knelt beside the largest hole, running his calloused fingers along its crumbly edges. The soil felt strangely loose, almost like sand, despite the hard-packed clay that typically characterized Elena's land. He picked up a handful, letting it sift through his fingers. It lacked the usual cohesion, the earthy scent. This wasn't just surface erosion, he realized. This was something deeper. Sam, guided by Apache's persistent intuition, knew they needed to go beyond the visible. His mind, trained by years of living off the land, began piecing together possibilities. He considered the local geology, the hidden pathways of water, the delicate balance of the arid ecosystem. He recalled tales from his grandfather about changes in the water table, about how subterranean shifts could manifest unexpectedly on the surface. "We need to dig," Sam announced, his voice firm, looking up at Elena. "I mean, really dig. These holes, they're just symptoms. The real problem is underneath." His eyes scanned the horizon, then returned to the worried expression on Elena's face. "Something is disrupting the groundwater, Elena. Something big." The implications of such a statement hung heavy in the air, a chilling premonition of the struggle that lay ahead. Sam's words, heavy with a new, unsettling certainty, resonated deeply with Elena. The chilling premonition he spoke of settled into her bones, echoing her own unspoken fears. She watched him, a man of few words but profound understanding, as he began to collect a shovel and a pickaxe from his truck, Apache whinnying softly from his tethered spot, as if urging them onward. Together, they returned to the largest, most agitated hole, the one that had drawn Apache's intense focus. The sun, relentlessly beating down, seemed to intensify the gravity of their task. Sweat beaded on Sam's brow almost immediately, as he began to break the hard, baked surface surrounding the inexplicable void. With each rhythmic swing of the pickaxe, a deeper layer beneath the surface was revealed. The initial loose soil quickly gave way to a more disturbing sight, a chaotic mix of fractured rock and oddly damp earth, inconsistent with the surrounding arid landscape. Elena helped, her hands blistered within minutes, but her determination outweighed the discomfort. They unearthed loose, unstable soil that seemed to have no structural integrity, almost as if it had been churned and then loosely resettled. There were pockets of what looked like subterranean disturbance, small fissures radiating outwards from the main cavity. The deeper they went, the more evident it became that this was no natural phenomenon. The ground felt wrong, unnatural. As they excavated, an almost imperceptible trickling sound became audible, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, a sinister whisper beneath the earth. Sam paused, listening intently, his eyes narrowing. He scooped up a handful of the damp earth, smelling it, then rubbing it between his fingers. "This isn't just dampness from rain, Elena," he stated, his voice low and grim. "This is water, and it's moving." His gaze swept across the widening excavation, then to the other holes dotted across the field. He connected the dots, drawing on decades of intimate knowledge of New Mexico's delicate geology. "These holes? They're not just random occurrences," Sam began, his hypothesis solidifying with each new piece of evidence they uncovered. "They're like pinpricks, symptoms of something much bigger happening below. I think we're looking at underground water leakage, Elena, probably from a disrupted aquifer." He explained, gesturing with his dirt-caked hands, how the groundwater, usually contained within subterranean rock layers, was now finding pathways to the surface through newly formed or exacerbated weaknesses. This was not the slow, natural seepage of an established spring. This was a forced, violent escape. The words "disrupted aquifer" hung in the hot air like a death knell. Elena's initial fear, that vague anxiety about her crops and livelihood, now transformed into a chilling dread that permeated her very being. An aquifer was the lifeblood of her farm, the source of every drop of water that sustained her land and her family. To hear it was disrupted was to hear her future unraveling. Her mind raced, picturing her carefully cultivated fields, a patchwork of green against the brown, slowly withering, turning to dust. She saw her small adobe home, the one her ancestors had built, standing desolate and abandoned. The implications were catastrophic. If her water source was compromised, not just her current harvest, but everything she had, everything her family had built, was in grave danger. The farm was more than just land. It was her heritage, her independence, her very identity. Losing the water meant losing it all. A cold, hard knot formed in her stomach. "What does that mean, Sam?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea for reassurance that she knew he couldn't give. Her gaze fell upon the churning earth, now revealing clear signs of flowing water, small rivulets carving new paths in the disturbed ground. The sight confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't merely a problem. It was a crisis of monumental proportions. Sam's chilling premonition quickly gained traction as their deeper investigation unfolded, revealing more unsettling truths about the land beneath Elena's feet. The soil samples he carefully extracted from varying depths beneath the largest and most active holes confirmed his growing suspicions. They were not merely dealing with disrupted groundwater. The very structure of the earth seemed to have been compromised, exhibiting signs of recent and extensive subsurface manipulation. The loose, almost granular consistency of the deeper layers suggested intense vibration or mechanical agitation, unlike anything natural to the region. This wasn't merely a natural aquifer problem. It pointed to human intervention, and a rather reckless one at that. Guided by his acute understanding of the local topography and the subtle signs of disturbance in the landscape, Sam's investigation began to hone in on a specific area, the expansive, newly acquired ranch property bordering Elena's modest farm. This land, recently purchased by a wealthy, out-of-state investor named Sterling, had been undergoing rapid and aggressive development. Whispers about Sterling's ambitious plans, involving vast amounts of water for exotic landscaping and even a private lake, had circulated through the small, tight-knit community for months. What had initially seemed like harmless, if opulent, development now took on a sinister cast. As Sam and Elena cautiously ventured closer to the new boundary of Sterling's land, the evidence became more blatant, impossible to ignore. They discovered recently cleared tracts of land, not for agriculture, but for what appeared to be heavy machinery staging areas. More damning were the faint but distinct tracks of large drilling equipment, leading directly towards a newly constructed imposing pump house that towered over the landscape, its pipes snaking ominously into the earth. There were no permits visible, no public records of such extensive water extraction projects filed with local authorities. This was not just extensive, it was illicit. The pieces of the puzzle began clicking into place with a horrifying precision. The mysterious holes on Elena's field, the strange soil properties, Apache's increasingly distressed behavior, all were direct consequences of the massive, unauthorized drilling and water diversion operations underway on Sterling's property. He was essentially siphoning off the shared underground water supply, the lifeblood of the entire valley, at an alarming rate. The aquifer, a delicate, slow, recharging natural reservoir that had sustained generations of local farmers, was being drained with rapacious speed. Sam knelt beside a newly formed fissure in the dry earth, tracing its jagged path with a grim expression. "He's tapping directly into the main artery of the aquifer," he stated, his voice low and heavy, filled with a mixture of anger and helplessness. "These holes, Elena, they're not just symptoms of a leak. They're sinkholes forming as the water table drops, stripping away the support from the ground above. Your land is literally collapsing because of what he's doing." Elena stared at the chasm, her heart pounding with a cold, paralyzing fear. The implications were staggering, almost too vast to comprehend. It wasn't just her crops or her immediate livelihood. Her entire farm, her ancestral home, was being undermined, quite literally. The water that fed her well, sustained her few remaining animals, and nourished the deep roots of her family's history on that land, was being stolen out from under her. The impending disaster was no longer a distant threat. It was a present and rapidly accelerating reality. Sterling's illegal activities weren't just causing a minor inconvenience. They were actively destroying Elena's farm, piece by agonizing piece, threatening to turn her vibrant, living land into a barren, dusty wasteland. The realization was a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and reeling. The chilling premonition that Sam had voiced settled deep into Elena's bones, transforming into an agonizing reality. The revelation, slowly unveiled through their meticulous digging and Sam's expert analysis, broke something fragile within her. She had built her life, her family's future, on this land, a legacy passed down through generations. To learn that an outside force, a careless, destructive neighbor, was actively jeopardizing it, threatening to turn her verdant, if modest, fields into barren dust, was almost unbearable. Her mind reeled with images of her crops withering, the well running dry, the very earth cracking under the relentless New Mexico sun. It wasn't just a farm, it was her identity, her history, the only truly stable thing she had ever known. A wave of profound heartbreak washed over her, a desolate grief for a future that seemed to be eroding with every passing day, just like the soil beneath her feet. The dream of independence, of providing for her children through the sweat of her brow on this ancestral land, felt like it was dissolving into nothingness. Elena's visible despair resonated with Sam on a primal level. He watched her shoulders slump, her usually resilient gaze dimming with unshed tears, and a familiar, bitter ache stirred in his own heart. He remembered, with a vivid clarity that still stung, the slow, agonizing death of his own family's ranch. Not from drought, but from encroaching development, from powerful interests that saw land as mere commodity, not as a living, breathing entity tied to generations of toil and love. He recalled the countless battles, the hopeless appeals, the eventual crushing defeat that had forced his family to abandon their heritage. The wounds of that loss, though decades old, had never fully healed. They had simply scabbed over, lying dormant until a moment like this ripped them open anew. He understood Elena's pain, not just intellectually, but deep in his marrow, a shared echo of devastation. Her heartbreak was a mirror reflecting his own buried trauma, stirring a fierce, protective instinct within him. As Elena stood trembling, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides, Sam walked over and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. The gesture was simple, unspoken, yet it communicated volumes. It wasn't pity, but a profound understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice stealing their breath away. In that quiet moment, amidst the dust and the gaping holes, a silent understanding formed between them. It was more than just a shared problem. It was a shared purpose. Sam's past loss, the ghost of his family's vanishing legacy, merged with Elena's immediate, terrifying struggle. An unspoken promise solidified between them. They would not let this happen again. They would fight. They would stand together, two solitary figures against a powerful, indifferent foe, bound by the land and the memory of what had been and what still might be. The fight for Elena's farm wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs, a testament to resilience, to the unyielding spirit of the land, and to the quiet strength forged in shared adversity. The sun beat down, harsh and unyielding, but beneath its glare, a new resolve began to take root. The sun beat down, harsh and unyielding, but beneath its glare, a new resolve began to take root in Elena and Sam. Their first step, fueled by this burgeoning determination, was to confront the neighboring ranch owner, Sterling. Elena, her voice trembling slightly but firm, explained the devastating impact his unauthorized drilling was having on her land, detailing the collapsing soil and the dwindling water table. Sam stood beside her, his quiet presence adding weight to her words, providing an unspoken endorsement of her claims. Sterling, however, met their concerns with an icy dismissiveness that chilled Elena to the bone. He was a man accustomed to having his way, his eyes holding a patronizing glint as he listened, or rather, pretended to listen. He denied any wrongdoing, asserting with an air of absolute authority his unquestionable right to develop his property as he saw fit. He even had the audacity to suggest Elena was exaggerating, perhaps even trying to extort money from him, a wealthy newcomer to the region. His smug confidence, backed by his obvious financial power, left Elena feeling a potent mix of frustration and utter helplessness, as if her lived reality was being deliberately invalidated. Undeterred by Sterling's stone wall, Elena and Sam then turned to the local community, hoping that a collective voice might carry more weight. They spoke to neighbors, friends, and fellow farmers, explaining the environmental threat, not just to Elena's farm, but potentially to the entire local water supply. They shared Sam's geological findings and Apache's intuitive distress, hoping to awaken a sense of communal responsibility. Yet the response was largely underwhelming, tinged with a disheartening mix of skepticism, fear, and even subtle resentment. Some were genuinely concerned but too intimidated by Sterling's influence and wealth to speak out. Others openly expressed doubt, suggesting Elena was making a mountain out of a molehill, perhaps driven by envy of Sterling's success. A few even had business dealings with Sterling, providing him with supplies or labor, making them reluctant to bite the hand that fed them. The local council, when approached, offered little more than platitudes, unwilling to challenge a powerful figure who had already begun to weave himself into the fabric of the community through generous, if strategically placed, donations and investments. The harsh reality of their isolation began to sink in. Elena and Sam realized they were largely alone in their fight, facing an uphill battle against an adversary who possessed not only immense wealth, but also a cunning ability to manipulate public perception and wield influence. The initial spark of shared purpose, while still glowing, now felt like a fragile flame against a gathering storm. Every door they knocked on seemed to close softly in their faces. Every plea for help met with polite but firm resistance. The weight of the situation pressed down on them, threatening to crush their spirits. Sterling's pervasive reach within the community was far more extensive than they had initially imagined, creating an invisible, yet incredibly strong barrier of silence and complicity. It was not just Sterling they were fighting, but an ingrained system of power and deference that made the truth an inconvenient, easily dismissed whisper. This deeply entrenched lack of support left Elena feeling more vulnerable than ever, her resolve now tested by the daunting scale of the opposition. The unspoken promise cemented their resolve, yet the path ahead remained obscured by formidable obstacles. Even as Elena and Sam mentally prepared for battle, Apache, the silent sentinel, offered a tangible, constant reminder of the unseen danger lurking beneath the earth. His agitated behavior, a nervous pawing at the ground near the largest of Sterling's illegally drilled holes, increased in frequency and intensity whenever they approached the affected areas. His whinnies, once signs of mild curiosity, now carried a distinct edge of distress, a low, rumbling whimper that seemed to vibrate with the agony of the parched land itself. Apache's unwavering focus on the deteriorating soil and the widening fissures was not merely an animal's instinct. It was a profound, almost spiritual connection to the suffering ecosystem, serving as a constant, living barometer of the escalating crisis. For Elena, the mustang became a symbol of the innocent life threatened by human greed. For Sam, Apache's persistent agitation was a stark confirmation of his gravest fears, pushing him to deepen their investigation. Together, Sam and Elena embarked on the painstaking, often disheartening task of meticulous documentation. They photographed every new crack in the dry earth, every shrinking puddle in what used to be a vibrant irrigation ditch, and every wilting plant struggling for survival in Elena's once fertile fields. Sam used his intimate knowledge of the local topography and water patterns to map the flow of the dwindling aquifer, identifying precisely how Sterling's illegal drilling was intercepting the lifeblood of Elena's farm. He meticulously recorded soil samples, noting the increasing salinity and the disturbing absence of moisture in areas that should have been damp. Elena, armed with a new-found determination, kept a detailed log of her crop failures, the declining yield, and the astronomical increase in her water bills as she desperately tried to compensate for the lost natural supply. Every piece of evidence, every photograph, every entry in their logbook was a testament to Sterling's blatant disregard for environmental regulations and the livelihoods of those around him. They were building a case, brick by agonizing brick, against a man who believed himself untouchable. Their next step was to seek legal counsel, a move that quickly introduced them to the harsh realities of justice skewed by wealth and power. The lawyer they consulted, a seasoned but cynical man from the nearest town, listened patiently to their story, meticulously reviewing their growing stack of documentation. He acknowledged the compelling nature of their evidence, particularly Sam's expert analysis and Apache's unusual, intuitive reactions, but his face remained etched with a weary resignation. He explained with a detached professionalism that chilled Elena to the bone that environmental laws, while seemingly comprehensive on paper, were riddled with loopholes and complex technicalities. More significantly, he stressed that enforcing these laws often required vast financial resources, resources that Sterling, with his bottomless pockets, could easily leverage to his advantage. Lawsuits could drag on for years, burying them in legal fees they could ill afford, while Sterling could simply continue to bleed Elena's land dry. The scales of justice, he implied, were often balanced by the weight of one's bank account, and in this David and Goliath scenario, David was once again at a severe disadvantage. The prospect of an equitable legal battle seemed remote, almost impossible, a crushing blow to their burgeoning hope. The fight, they realized, would have to be waged on more than just legal grounds. The grim reality of the deepening crisis on Elena's farm became more painfully evident with each passing day. The holes, once mere anomalies, now began to coalesce into a desperate landscape of crumbling earth. Her precious chili plants, usually vibrant and robust, drooped with a sickly pallor, their leaves curling inward as if in silent protest against the parching soil. The once reliable irrigation channels, fed by a diminishing underground supply, now offered only a trickle, barely enough to moisten the surface, let alone sustain a healthy crop. Desperation gnawed at Elena, a cold, persistent fear that settled deep in her bones. She watched her livelihood wither, her dreams of providing for her children fading like the desert mirage. Financial ruin loomed large, an imminent threat that overshadowed every waking moment. The mortgage payments, the bills for seed and equipment, the basic necessities of life, all were now in jeopardy, threatening to rip her from the very home that had sheltered generations. The prospect of losing everything, of having to uproot her children and leave the only life they had ever known, was a constant, agonizing ache in her chest. Yet, through this encroaching gloom, Sam remained a steadfast, unwavering presence. He spent countless hours on her land, not just in idle contemplation, but actively working, trying to devise temporary fixes for the failing irrigation, experimenting with drought-resistant techniques he had learned through a lifetime connected to this arid land. He helped patch fences, cleared debris, and offered a steady hand, his quiet competence a balm to Elena's frayed nerves. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false hope. Instead, he offered solid, dependable support, his very presence a testament to his commitment. His determination mirrored her own burgeoning resilience, a shared refusal to surrender to the overwhelming odds. There were evenings when, after a long day of fruitless labor, they would sit on her porch, the vast New Mexico sky unfolding above them, and simply exist in comfortable silence. Words were often unnecessary. A shared glance, a knowing nod, conveyed more than any elaborate speech. Through these shared hardships, a profound bond began to solidify between them, growing stronger than the dry earth beneath their feet. It transcended simple, neighborly acquaintance, evolving into a deep, unspoken trust that neither of them had anticipated. Elena found herself relying on Sam's quiet strength, his practical insights, and his unwavering belief that they would find a way. She saw in him not just a cowboy, but a kindred spirit, a man who understood the land and its unforgiving ways, a man whose own past had forged a similar tenacity. Sam, in turn, recognized Elena's fierce independence and her unwavering love for her family and her heritage. He respected her quiet dignity in the face of adversity, her refusal to break under the immense pressure. He saw beyond the struggling farmer to the resilient woman, and his admiration grew with every passing day. The lines between protector and protected blurred. They were partners in this silent battle, two souls bound by a common threat and a shared, unspoken understanding. Their connection wasn't rooted in romantic fantasy, but in the raw, honest reality of their struggle, a deep and enduring friendship forged in the crucible of impending loss. It was a bond built on respect, on shared values, and on the quiet promise that they wouldn't face this alone. The grim reality of their situation, exacerbated by the legal roadblocks and the community's hesitation, finally forced a stark realization upon both Elena and Sam. Direct confrontation and traditional legal channels were proving to be an insufficient and incredibly slow path to justice. Sterling's resources vastly outmatched their own, allowing him to employ delaying tactics and legal loopholes that simply drained their limited funds and even more limited energy. They needed a new strategy, one that bypassed the corruptible systems and appealed directly to a force Sterling couldn't easily buy or intimidate: public opinion. It was a desperate gamble, but one born from the absolute necessity of survival. If they couldn't fight him in the courts, they would fight him in the court of public scrutiny. Their new plan crystallized around the idea of exposing Sterling's actions to a wider audience, hoping to garner enough public support to create an undeniable pressure that even his wealth couldn't withstand. This wasn't just about saving Elena's farm anymore. It was about protecting the aquifer, the lifeblood of the entire region, and holding a powerful figure accountable for his ecological devastation. They understood the risk involved, the potential for Sterling to retaliate even more aggressively. But the alternative, watching Elena's farm die a slow, agonizing death, was no longer an option. They had to fight, and they had to fight smart. With this new resolve, they began to research local media outlets, focusing on those known for their investigative journalism and willingness to tackle sensitive environmental issues. Their search led them to Sarah Jenkins, a tenacious reporter for the New Mexico Sentinel, renowned for her unflinching reports on corporate malfeasance and environmental injustice. Elena, with Sam by her side, finally secured an appointment. The meeting was tense, filled with the raw emotion of Elena's story and the quiet conviction of Sam's observations. They presented Sarah with the meticulous evidence they had been diligently gathering: photographs of the drying land, the disappearing water, the geological surveys Sam had painstakingly sourced, and even the subtle yet undeniable indications of Apache's distress around the contaminated areas. It was Apache's story, however, that truly captured Sarah's imagination. Elena recounted how the Mustang had been the first to sense the ecological imbalance, his frantic pawing and whinnying serving as an early warning system. Sam explained Apache's deep connection to the land, his instinctual awareness of its health, and how the horse's behavior had guided their initial investigation. The idea of an animal, particularly a wild Mustang, acting as a sentinel for environmental destruction was a compelling narrative hook, one that Sarah immediately recognized as having significant public appeal. She saw beyond the dry facts and figures, sensing the powerful human interest story that lay beneath. Sarah, a seasoned journalist, listened intently, asking probing questions, her skepticism slowly giving way to intrigue. She recognized the gravity of what Elena and Sam were alleging and the potential for a powerful exposé. The sheer audacity of a wealthy rancher illegally drilling and endangering an entire community's water supply, juxtaposed with the plight of a single mother and her intuitive Mustang, was a narrative goldmine. She agreed to look into it, hinting at a potential breakthrough that could turn the tide. A glimmer of hope, fragile yet persistent, began to shine in the dusty landscape of Elena's despair. The journalist's commitment felt like a small victory, a crack in the seemingly impenetrable fortress of Sterling's influence. It was a first step, but a profoundly significant one, signaling that their silent battle was about to become very public. The journalist's article, a meticulously researched and passionately written piece, finally broke through the local apathy surrounding Elena's plight. It wasn't just a dry report. It was a deeply human story, featuring poignant photographs of Elena's parched fields, close-ups of the mysterious gaping holes, and most compellingly, a striking image of Apache standing sentinel-like beside one of the largest depressions, his intelligent eyes seeming to convey a silent warning. The narrative detailed the illegal drilling activities on Sterling's ranch, presenting irrefutable evidence of environmental negligence and disregard for the delicate desert ecosystem. It exposed the gradual depletion of the vital aquifer, directly linking it to the encroaching desertification of Elena's once fertile land. But what truly captured the public imagination was the inclusion of Apache's uncanny intuition, portraying him not just as a horse, but as a silent, four-legged witness, his agitated behavior around the damaged areas serving as a powerful, non-verbal testament to the unseen danger beneath the earth. The story painted a vivid picture of a ruthless outsider threatening a resilient single mother and her ancestral home, all while a noble mustang seemed to be sounding the alarm. The article spread like wildfire, first through local community forums and then, propelled by its unique angle, across regional news outlets. The response within the community was a tumultuous mix of emotions. Some residents, those who had quietly witnessed Sterling's unchecked expansion and suspected foul play, were outraged. They felt validated, their whispers of concern now amplified into a public shout. These individuals, often the elder members with deep roots in the valley, rallied behind Elena, offering their support and sharing their own concerns about the shifting water levels and unusual occurrences they had observed. They understood that if Elena's farm was drying up, their own wells might be next. However, a significant portion of the community remained skeptical, or perhaps, more accurately, fearful. Sterling was a powerful man, his wealth and influence casting a long shadow over the valley. Many relied on his burgeoning businesses for employment or had accepted his generous, albeit often manipulative, donations to local causes. They feared repercussion if they openly sided with Elena and Sam, concerned about losing their jobs, their contracts, or their standing in the community. Their silence, though not an endorsement of Sterling's actions, was a powerful force that hindered a unified front. They rationalized his activities, perhaps believing the official denials, or simply choosing to turn a blind eye to avoid becoming targets themselves. It was a stark reminder of how easily power could corrupt and how fear could paralyze a community into inaction. Sterling, however, was not one to tolerate public scrutiny or defy. The article, which he initially dismissed as sensationalist fodder, quickly infuriated him. He saw it not as a legitimate exposé, but as a personal attack, an attempt by a struggling farmer and her cowboy accomplice to tarnish his reputation and hinder his ambitious development plans. His anger was swift and decisive. Within days of the article's publication, Elena and Sam received legal notices. Sterling was initiating a lawsuit, accusing them of defamation, slander, and intentional interference with his business operations. He sought not only damages, but also a court order to silence them, to prevent any further public discussion of his activities. It was a blatant attempt to intimidate, a calculated move to crush their spirit and financially cripple them into submission, ensuring that their voices and Apache's silent testimony would never again reach the ears of the public. He believed that by attacking them legally, he could effectively bury the truth and continue his destructive path unimpeded. This counterattack was not unexpected, yet it landed with the force of a physical blow, threatening to undo all the fragile progress they had made. The mounting pressure culminated in a truly dramatic confrontation, a contentious town meeting called by concerned citizens, where Sterling, the wealthy ranch owner, made a theatrical appearance. He arrived with an entourage of lawyers and public relations experts, his demeanor exuding an arrogant confidence that grated on the already raw nerves of the community. He attempted to discredit Elena and Sam, painting them as desperate, misguided individuals who were fabricating claims to extort him. His voice, smooth and practiced, filled the small community hall, weaving a narrative of his own benevolence and environmental stewardship, while subtly implying Elena's farm was simply mismanaged and failing independently. He dismissed the journalist's article as biased sensationalism and scoffed at the idea of an animal's testimony holding any weight. But Sterling's carefully constructed facade shattered with Apache's unexpected appearance. Sam, with a flash of inspired desperation, had quietly brought the mustang to the perimeter of the meeting hall, sensing that the animal's unwavering honesty might cut through Sterling's lies. As Sterling, growing increasingly condescending, began to mock Elena's plight and belittle Sam's cowboy wisdom, Apache let out a piercing, resonant whinny that silenced the room. The mustang, usually calm in Sam's presence, became intensely agitated. He pawed furiously at the packed earth outside the open double doors, kicking up dust, his nostrils flaring, eyes wide and rolling. Each snort and stomp seemed to echo Sterling's deceit, a visceral protest against the falsehoods being spun. The sound wasn't random. It was a guttural, primal outcry, as if the very spirit of the land was rebelling. Sam, his face grim, led Apache closer, allowing the community to witness the mustang's distress firsthand. As Sterling tried to continue, stammering, Apache whinnied again, a long, mournful sound, then began to buck and pull at his lead, unmistakably directing his fury towards the source of the lies. It was an animalistic testimony, raw and unfiltered, that spoke louder than any human argument. The sheer conviction in Apache's actions was undeniable, touching a chord deep within the hearts of the assembled townsfolk. They had known Sam and Elena for years. They knew their integrity, their connection to this land. To see the usually placid mustang, a creature so in tune with its environment, react with such vehemence to Sterling's presence was profoundly unsettling. This dramatic display, Apache's unwavering stance against the man who represented the destruction of their shared resources, acted as a powerful catalyst. The murmuring in the room grew louder, no longer just a few sympathetic whispers, but an undeniable roar of discontent. People began to stand, their faces etched with a dawning realization. The community, witnessing Apache's undeniable reaction, and now fully understanding the stakes, began to turn against Sterling. His smooth words, once so convincing to some, now rang hollow and false in the face of such raw, animalistic truth. The tide had truly turned. Demands for accountability filled the air, replacing the fear that had once silenced them. The silent wisdom of the mustang had galvanized them, transforming hesitant individuals into a united force. They demanded not only answers, but immediate action. The meeting devolved into a cacophony of voices, all aimed at the flustered, suddenly less arrogant Sterling, who found his practiced smile faltering under the weight of public condemnation. He was no longer in control. The community had awakened, and they were not going to be silenced again. Overwhelmed by the sudden, fierce current of public outcry and the irrefutable visual evidence presented by Apache's furious protest, Sterling's carefully constructed empire of denial began to crumble. The murmurs of discontent in the town hall escalated into a palpable wave of indignation. With the community's fear of him momentarily eclipsed by their collective outrage, a dam broke. People who had long suffered in silence, intimidated by Sterling's wealth and influence, found their voices. It wasn't long before the first of his former employees, emboldened by the unity of the townspeople and sickened by Sterling's blatant disregard for the land and its people, stepped forward. This brave individual, a man who had worked for Sterling for years, initially spoke haltingly, his voice laced with residual fear, but quickly gained confidence as he saw the nods of affirmation and support from his neighbors. He revealed that Sterling had indeed ordered illegal drilling operations, pushing beyond the boundaries of his permits, and even bribing local officials to look the other way. He described how they had been instructed to conceal the true depth and location of the breaches, using temporary fixes and misleading reports. This testimony, raw and unfiltered, provided the crucial human element to confirm what Sam and Elena had suspected all along. But it wasn't just words. The former employee had meticulously kept records, photographs, clandestine emails, and even a logbook detailing the dates and times of the illicit drilling, fearing this exact scenario. He handed over a thick binder, its contents meticulously organized, filled with damning proof. The information exploded like a bombshell, corroborating every detail Sam and Elena had painstakingly gathered. The documents provided undeniable evidence of unauthorized construction, environmental negligence, and deliberate attempts to cover up the damage to the aquifer directly beneath Elena's farm. Sterling, now pale and visibly shaken, tried to interject, to dismiss the man's claims as disgruntled lies, but his words were drowned out by the rising tide of anger. The community now saw him not as a powerful landowner, but as a deceitful corporate predator who had threatened their very existence for personal gain. The legal consequences for Sterling were swift and severe. Armed with the irrefutable testimony and the meticulously documented proof, the authorities, who could no longer ignore the overwhelming public pressure and undeniable evidence, launched a full investigation. Sterling faced a barrage of charges: environmental violations, illegal drilling, obstruction of justice, and even bribery. The heavy fines levied against him were substantial, crippling his financial empire. More importantly, he was forced to cease all destructive operations immediately. His ranch, a symbol of his ill-gotten gains and reckless ambition, was ultimately seized as part of the legal proceedings and as compensation for the environmental damage he had inflicted. The legal battle, though arduous, concluded with a decisive victory for the community and the environment. In the aftermath, the community, once fragmented by fear and economic disparity, emerged stronger and more united than ever. The crisis had forged an unbreakable bond among them. They rallied around Elena, recognizing her farm as a symbol of their shared resilience and their collective fight. Neighbors offered their time, resources, and expertise. Local farmers brought their equipment to help reinforce the aquifer. Environmental experts, moved by the story and the community's determination, volunteered their services to assess the damage and devise long-term solutions for restoration and protection. The initial fear of environmental catastrophe transformed into a powerful wave of collective action, a testament to what a united community could achieve when faced with injustice. Through their combined efforts, they began the arduous but hopeful process of healing the land and securing the aquifer for future generations. The cacophony of voices demanding accountability from Sterling had set in motion an irreversible sequence of events. Overwhelmed by the public outcry, the truth, long suppressed, finally found its release. Sterling's carefully constructed empire of deceit began to crumble as former employees, witnessing the community's newfound resolve and no longer fearing their former boss's retribution, stepped forward. They provided damning testimony, offering irrefutable proof of his illegal drilling and environmentally destructive activities. Detailed logs, clandestine photographs, and even confessions of coercion painted a clear picture of his calculated disregard for the land and its resources. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no room for doubt or further denial. Legal consequences followed swiftly and decisively. Sterling faced severe repercussions far beyond what he had initially scoffed at. Heavy fines, designed to compensate for the extensive environmental damage, were levied against him. More importantly, a forced cessation of his destructive operations was mandated, bringing an immediate halt to the illegal drilling that had threatened the very lifeblood of the region. His ranch, once a symbol of his ill-gotten gains and reckless ambition, was ultimately seized, its assets liquidated to cover the penalties and fund the necessary restoration efforts. The once untouchable figure was stripped of his power and influence, his fall serving as a stark warning to anyone who dared to exploit the land for personal profit. With Sterling's destructive influence removed, the community, once divided and hesitant, now united with a shared purpose. They rallied around Elena, offering an outpouring of support and assistance to restore her land and secure the aquifer that sustained them all. Neighbors who had once been skeptical or fearful now worked side by side, their collective efforts a testament to the power of a united front. Expertise was shared, hands were lent, and resources pooled. The immediate threat to Elena's farm had been neutralized. The aquifer, though damaged, was protected, and plans were meticulously developed for its long-term rehabilitation and sustainable management. The once parched fields, scarred by the invasive holes, began their slow, arduous journey toward healing, a visible symbol of the community's renewed hope. Elena's farm, her ancestral legacy, was saved. The land that had almost withered and died beneath the weight of greed began to show signs of recovery, responding to the renewed care and attention. The aquifer, the silent provider of life, was no longer under threat, its precious waters now flowing more securely, albeit gradually. The community, having faced adversity together, emerged stronger and more cohesive. They established new protocols and safeguards, ensuring long-term environmental protection, a collective commitment born from their harrowing experience. Elena, though she had always valued her independence, found herself embraced by this stronger, more supportive community. Her resilience, her unwavering fight for what was right, had inspired others, transforming her from a solitary figure, fighting a lonely battle, into a beacon of determination for her neighbors. She had, in their eyes, become a quiet hero, embodying the spirit of self-reliance and community action that was so vital to their way of life. And then there was Sam. He had processed his own past trauma through this shared fight, finding a form of closure in helping Elena protect what he had once lost. The pain of his family's land, the bitterness of that memory, had softened, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. He remained a constant, quiet presence in Elena's life, a silent guardian and friend. His wisdom of the land, once a solitary comfort, was now shared, a vital resource for the rebuilding community. Apache, too, retained his place, a living testament to the instinct that had ignited their fight, a loyal companion to Sam, and a symbol of nature's enduring wisdom. The land was healing, and so were the people who lived upon it. Elena stood on her revitalized farm, the morning sun warming her face, a gentle breeze rustling through newly planted crops. The once ominous holes, those gaping wounds in the earth, were now meticulously filled, the soil rich and dark, ready to yield life once more. Her fields, once parched and brittle, had regained their vibrant green, a testament to resilience and hope. It wasn't just the land that had healed. Her spirit, too, felt a profound sense of restoration. The fight had been arduous, fraught with despair and uncertainty, but looking out at the thriving landscape, Elena understood the true depth of their victory. This wasn't merely the recovery of a farm, it was the reclamation of a legacy, a defiant assertion of community over greed, and a profound reaffirmation of nature's enduring power. She reached down, touching a young cornstalk, its tender leaves unfolding towards the sky. Each new sprout felt like a miracle, a living symbol of perseverance. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the land's recovery, but for the unexpected bonds forged through hardship. The memory of Sterling's arrogance, his dismissive words, faded in comparison to the unwavering support she had received. The town, once quietly divided, now stood as a unified front, their shared experience having forged an unbreakable collective spirit. They had seen the truth, spoken by a wild mustang, and had chosen to stand with it. Sam rode up on Apache, his usual quiet demeanor softened by a subtle smile. The mustang, sleek and powerful, seemed to exude a newfound calm, its eyes reflecting the serene landscape it had helped protect. Their presence had become a comforting, familiar sight on Elena's farm, a symbol of their shared journey. Sam dismounted, his gaze sweeping across the fields, a quiet pride evident in his eyes. He didn't need to speak. The understanding between them ran deeper than words. His own past wounds, the loss of his family's land, had finally found a measure of peace through this fight. He had not only helped Elena save her farm, but in doing so had healed a part of himself, transforming old pain into purpose. Apache nuzzled Elena's hand, a soft wicker escaping its lips. The mustang, whose primal instincts had pierced through human deceit, remained a powerful reminder of nature's silent wisdom. It was Apache's raw, unfiltered truth that had broken the spell of Sterling's influence, allowing the community to finally see what had always been right before their eyes. The cowboy's mustang, initially just a loyal companion, had become an unlikely hero, a catalyst for justice, and a beacon of hope. Elena looked at Sam, then at Apache, then back at her flourishing fields. She knew the fight for environmental protection and community solidarity was ongoing, but they had laid a strong foundation. The aquifer, thanks to their collective efforts and continued vigilance, was secure, supplying life-giving water to her farm and the surrounding area. The healing process continued, a testament to what could be achieved when people listened not just to reason, but to the deeper truths whispered by the land itself. The story of her struggle, once a tale of impending heartbreak, had blossomed into an inspiring narrative of triumph, resilience, and the profound, enduring power of truth. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, truth, community, and the silent wisdom of nature can prevail, leading to unexpected changes and stronger bonds. The land would remember, and so would the people, forever changed by the single mother, the cowboy, and the mustang, who had broken not only earth but also hearts, only to mend them stronger than before. Thank you for watching.